Welcome, everyone. I'm Denise LeBlanc, Executive Director of Fuller Craft Museum here in Brockton, Massachusetts. Our mission at Fuller Craft is to provide meaningful discovery of contemporary craft through exhibitions, collections, education, and public programs. We're committed to challenging perceptions and building appreciation of the material world. Our purpose is to inspire, stimulate, and enrich an ever-expanding community. To learn more about the collection, exhibitions, and other upcoming virtual events, or becoming a member, please visit us at fullercraft.org. I'm thrilled to have you join us tonight for our panel, Disrupting Craftivism, Reducing Harm, and Creating Greater Impact, a conversation about the current state of affairs within the craftivist movement and the role that craft activism can play in creating impact and change. Our host tonight is Shannon Downey, better known as Badass Cross Stitch. Shannon is a community organizer disguised as a fiber artist and craftivist. She blends her politics, activism, and art into projects that are designed to inspire others to take action, think, discuss, engage with democracy and their community, and find some digital analog balance. She's the instigator behind Rita's Quilt, Make Don't Break, at Badass, Her Story, and the country's first Craftivist in Residence program. Welcome, Shannon. Excited to have this conversation.
Yay. Thanks, y'all. Thanks for that intro. Hello, friends. I am like downright giddy tonight, knowing that you're all out there joining us, my mom and dad, and having this like amazing all-star lineup of humans to converse with tonight is just really exciting. I do want to start by thanking the Fuller Craft Museum. The team over there is like a total gift. And I feel really like honored to be collaborating with them in the development of the country's first Craftivist in Residence program, which will launch this fall. That's actually one of the major catalyzers for tonight's conversation. And I'd like to provide a bit of context before I introduce the panel. Early in my work, I was sort of assigned the word craftivist, and I loved it. Like craft activism is a huge component of my work, and I think it's a pretty rad word. But as I continued in the craftivism space, I started to feel like I didn't really fit in with what I was seeing. And so I started having conversations with makers who shared those feelings. Mindy being one of my sort of core processing partners. As the Fuller team and I began planning for the Craftivist in Residence program, we really started to dive into articulating our personal and shared definition and understanding of craftivism. And through all of those experiences, we sort of agreed that we'd like to see some critical exploration and rigor put to the movement right now, that this feels like a moment for that to happen. And so here we are together tonight to have the first of many of these chats with a wide range of voices and ideas for consideration. So with all that said, I'd like to introduce you to my friends and conspirators here and get this party started. You've probably noticed that the amazing Mindy Tsonas Choi is not here with us this evening, and I'm really sad to report that her dad is making his transition out of the world, and she's with her family right now. So, but Mindy has really been instrumental in bringing this evening to fruition and will be involved in all future events, so you're definitely going to get to hear from her. In alphabetical order, I present and introduce you to Diane Ivey. Diane Ivey is the owner and creative director of Lady Dye Yarns, an indie dye yarn company since 2010, a knitter for 18 years and a dyer, spinner, and crocheter for 13. Diane uses her expertise in growth and expansion to mentor and invest in BIPOC businesses to grow on a national scale. She spent 16 years in the nonprofit sector. She holds degrees in political science and mass communication, as well as public administration. Hi, Diane. Eric Reyes. Yay. Eric is an education nerd dedicated to improving access and repairing harms in public institutions. He works at Chicago Public Library's U Media program, which creates drop-in programs for teens throughout Chicago. He's a member of the Chicago ACT Collective, a group dedicated to self and community care through art making. Welcome, Eric.
Hey, everyone.
Omkari Williams is a speaker, writer, coach for activists with a particular affinity for introverted and highly sensitive activists, and host of the podcast Stepping into Truth, Conversations on Race, Gender, and Social Justice. She says leveraging the power of our collective stories creates meaningful change and helps bring justice to the world. Welcome, Omkari.
Hey, Shannon.
Hey. Sara Trail. While attending UC Berkeley, Sara created a quilt in memory of Trayvon Martin, and her love for sewing and passion for social justice intertwined. After graduating from the Harvard University Graduate School of Education, she founded the Social Justice Sewing Academy to be a platform where youth create art that engages and educates communities. Hello, Sara. All right, badasses one and all, here they are. So I have questions for y'all, but I'm ready to just roll with it if that's how this plays out. But in the interest of kicking it off, I think the most salient question to start with is, how do you think of and or define craftivism for yourself?
So I'm going to go first on that one.
Yes, you are.
When I think of craftivism, immediately, of course, I think of craft and activism and smushing the two things together. And what does that mean? So you're talking about whether it's fiber arts or music or dance or whatever the art form is, using it to advance a very specific social justice cause. That's how I think of craftivism. What I think craftivism is not is something like knitting pink hats for the Women's March, which I was part of, and I wore my pink hat, but knitting the hat isn't craftivism. Getting your butt to the march, making calls in support of something, that's activism. And when you're using your craft for that, to me, that's craftivism. It's not just making crafts, which is a perfectly legit thing to do and lovely, but they're different. So.
Thank you.
So I work at the Chicago Public Library, and we essentially have a hangout teen space for young people, 5,000 square feet. Part of my job is buying a lot of nice equipment and filling the space. And for me, I think that is part of my craft, is creating this space for young people to be in an institution that may have harmed them in the past, and understanding that, sometimes, young people have a bad relationship with our public schools, our police, other institutions like museums where they're not always welcome. So we create a space where they're really welcome in all of their smelly and scratchy forms. So that's one way that I define it. I also think about, every time I hear the word craftivism, I think of Shannon, so.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, I work with the Chicago Act Collective, and for us, that means putting our ear to the ground. Who in the crew hears what's going on? How can we create art to help elevate a voice or support a movement?
Awesome.
Adding on to kind of what Eric said, just because a lot of my work involves young people, I'd say my definition of craftivism is really heavy on the action. And it's I think sometimes people want to look at craftivism oh, posting things, just on Instagram or something. But I really think whether you're educating the community, whether you're mobilizing, whether you're encouraging people to call, all things that Shannon does. But I think really, also a form of, craftivism can be really engaging communities that don't often have the opportunity to create. I know that we know creating is, luxury and the cost of, with a few exceptions, but quilting per se, there's a pretty high entry point. So it's when you can bring, it's sometimes the juxtaposition of giving, young people or even just people from marginalized groups in general, whether that's jails, homeless centers, LGBT centers in LA, really anything, but giving populations that don't typically have access to use such a luxurious, commodity of time and expense and all that, to really, make a message that often might be dismantling the very homogenous group that's kind of running that industry. I think something really interesting about the intersection of SGSA is we're often making art about things that I'd say maybe majority of the more traditional quilting world wouldn't even agree with. So I think it's sometimes taking a medium and flipping it, you know, to have a message or share a point or really just hit something home of like, not only is this not okay, but here's 5 things you can do about it. Everyone needs to know about it. This is unfair. This is unjust. And really using art to promote a cause or encourage an action or really just truly educate the community that might be viewing it.
I want to piggyback on what Sara said, and particularly with the work that I do, a lot of people just, when you hear the word indie dyer, that I just dye yarn. But I think about craftivism. It's also taking knowledge and experience and dismantling systematic racism in different institutions and industries, particularly the crafting industry, right? Here I am in the crafting industry, and I'm about business equity to, for the BIPOC, communities where, for centuries, Black and brown people have been the source of a lot of textiles and fiber for the world, through slavery, through servitude and all that, and realizing the one of the biggest areas of, like, when you think about is money and equity, and flipping it around to educate the crafting community on other Black and brown businesses that are in the industry doing the same thing, and working with them collaboratively to bring income to them, really. And we still, I still think that creating something with your hands, but I think it's true. I think the biggest impact is about getting your butt to the march or to that speaking event, and you can still wear something, but it's really the action that you do with it. And not just for that moment, but when I think about craftivism, I think about longevity, but also dismantling oppressive systems that exist. And I feel that we still have a long way to go in craftivism because there's so much to dismantle. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to actually jump on that. And also because I noticed a question in the chat where someone wanted me to talk more about how the Pussy Hat Project is not craftivism. And what I mean by that is, to me, it's what's your intention with the art that you're making or the project that you're doing. Is that intention actually going to change something on the other side? And that, to me, is where the action that everyone's touched on really comes into it. It's like, what's the impact going to be? And we can create something funky or fun or beautiful or whatever, but if it's not going to push us to change, then I don't think it meets the level of craftivism. I think it's craft, but I don't think it meets that level of activism that makes it that specific thing.
Corey, one of the things that I sort of liken that to is my protest signs, right? So I've done a bunch of like big protest signs that have gotten a lot of attention on the internet, and folks call it craftivism, right? People always like tag it as craftivism. But I actually, when I start to like think critically about that piece in particular, I'm like, it's not really craftivism. I mean, it's protest art, right? Like I made a rad piece of protest art. Does it then become craftivism because I am carrying it at a march for an issue that I'm doing, months and months of work on, right? Like then is it a craftivist tactic to bring attention, to this thing that I'm working on? And so I sort of think of the Pussy Hats in the same way, right? Like, is it, it's not inherent, like to me, it's not inherently craftivism just because you have made a hat for a thing. It's that you have, I know that for some people too, though, the contribution of the Pussy Hats was like, they physically could not go to a march, right? And Absolutely. So they created that to give to folks who were at the march as like, a way to participate and a way to like create around that. And so that's why I love this conversation so much, because like I struggle with defining like what is it that I do that would constitute as craftivism versus like rad internet art or a protest sign or right, like. And so for me it's really about like the community focus, and it sounds like a lot of you are focusing on like the community aspect of it and the the action and movement of people within that community.
One of the things I'm going to say, Mindy and I did this last year. Because going off on the pussy hat movement, right? Like particularly in the crafting industry, a lot of people of color were really upset about the whole pussy hat, and a lot of other people were too. And one of the things that we did was we wanted to really engage people in getting involved in the political. My whole thing last year and prior to the buildup of the 2020 election was to get people involved in the crafting community, to go out and vote, and mobilize people to vote, to get people registered, take people to the polls. And we wanted to create something that would generate interest for people to move. One of the things, I spoke on a panel at the Fuller Museum a couple years ago, and I said, I know that a lot of white women can go out and be activists because they made so many pussy hats and they might. So there's no excuse that they shouldn't get their skin in a game when it comes to dismantling systematic racism, right? And we created this group, created this project called the Empower People Project, and it was the purple bandana. And we made sure that there were people of color involved, that there was an actual action step. I was like, we're not just making this to make a bandana to wear to vote. We said these were the actions that we wanted you to take. We wanted you to go out and register someone to vote. We wanted you to, have conversations in the community. There were always actions to that. We wanted to separate that from what the pussy hat movement was. And using, people do go to meetings and they do knit and they do crochet and they do craft, but it was really about engaging, and not only that's reaching across the aisle, but actually doing something that would move the conversation or move an action forward. And I feel like craftivism has changed, that the concept of craftivism has been pushed forward in a way by a lot of BIPOCs in the crafting community on wanting that action to happen, and not just you make this and then it goes away. You know what I mean? So
if intention is a key catalyzer for one's craftivist work, what are the things that y'all are focusing on or considering or reflecting on when you are articulating your intention for a body of work?
That's a really good question. I think that for me, my focus is always on what is the next step that someone can take to move them in the direction of advancing their cause, whatever that is. And also that I really focus on it being small steps, because I think that one of the things we get stuck in this whole idea of craftivism and this whole idea of activism in general is the notion that everything has to be huge and have massive impact in order to have value. And that stops us. That just gets in the way. And it's also really, truthfully, it's just playing into a capitalistic, patriarchal structure that says you have to do big or it doesn't really matter. And so I really like to encourage people to find the thing that they're interested in and think about what action they can take that's just going to keep moving that ball forward, that's sustainable for them, but is actually going to have an impact out beyond just what they're doing.
I would definitely echo kind of that insight of like really commitment and like longevity and more than action. I'd say a current example of one of the things that Choi is doing in the form of activism is like we're doing like a 2020 version of the AIDS project. And while not necessarily relying on the volunteers to do the activism and the planned exhibiting, we have like the project is called the SJSA Remembrance Project. And basically people are making banners of people who've been murdered unfairly due to systems of gang violence or law enforcement or just systems of white supremacy, racial bias, et cetera, But in honoring those names, I think the crafting kind of comes on the volunteers or the sewing or the art making, but really the craftivism part comes with, in conjunction with the communities that we're exhibiting. Here's organizations like from the Trayvon Martin Foundation, what Oscar Grant's family is doing. These are tangible outcomes because I'd say like roughly, I don't know exactly quantitative data, but I'd say like 99% of the people being honored in the banners haven't even gotten justice for their murder. So those are like the effects of like make the banners, cool, that's on volunteers. Show the banners, that's on us. What we want to do when we show the banners, that's really the tangible act of craftivism, not necessarily the initial creation. However, there are some volunteers that do go above and beyond, and in their posting, they can say the murder, the trial's coming up. You know, these are things we can do. So I definitely think there's a level of personal, like it really depends on how much your commitment can be, because there can be someone who engages in the project and her act of making and follow through actions could be, you know, craftivism, or someone could make it in silence, not even want their name attributed to the project. They made it solely for the art therapeutic piece of, I care about this community. I might not know what else I can do, but I can make this art in solidarity with community that's, you know, clearly being disproportionately, you know, impacted by some of these larger systems. But I think there's varying degrees. And so I think kind of piggybacking on what you said, it really depends on your commitment to engaging. And I think more importantly, the longevity. I think there's been like currently with a lot of the like 21st century civil rights movement that's been going on, like a lot of everyone's popping up and wanting to quote unquote be an activist or, you know, be a craftivist or artivist or et cetera, et cetera. But I think it's more than just expanding your personal art practice, but really focusing on the what's the so what, what's the what's next, what's the what can we do now. And I think when people form their like entire craftivist or artivist, you know, identity based on solely on their own art practice and never in conjunction with the community they might even be trying to do, I think craftivism, just like, you know, teaching should be with the community, not necessarily for the community.
That's a big statement, Sara. I'm writing it down so I can stitch it later.
Yeah.
Eric, what do you do? You know, you are within an institution in a lot of ways, but I know you, so I know how you roll. So when you're thinking about working within an institution, but in service to the community and to young people, like what are you thinking about in your intention setting?
Absolutely. I just want to echo some of the statements that the folks before me said. Like this idea of going big or going home, like, is such a barrier for a lot of people, right? And for me in high school, like I was feeling kind of like something was wrong. You know, I didn't know what to do. I knew I should have been doing better, but I got into these kind of like disagreements with my teachers, and then I stopped going, right? And so for me, my interest and love of education and public education has been driven by like bad experiences with a public institution, right? So like I just I had to go to grad school, right, for therapy for that, right, because I didn't graduate on time and I felt like a failure. And I was just like, I don't want that to happen to a lot of kids. And we know that it does. We know that kids often feel rejected by all types of stuff. So again, like I'm kind of stuck in that youth space a lot, but like other people are saying, there's so many little steps that you can take that make big ripples, and like that really drives my attention, because I've been on both sides and I've seen, like, I remember being at like Iraq war protests and being like, this shit did not go the way I wanted it to go, right? I look back on that, right, whatever, 12 years ago, and I'm like, well, we lost that one, right? Like, but you know, people saw us in the streets and now they're out in the streets now, you know, like, so those little ripples mean a lot to me. And so I think we can do those in a lot of ways. And I try not to overwhelm myself with those big asks, because which is part of why we started the collective, to make sure that we take care of each other collectively in this struggle, because you could really get lost and you can really hurt yourself by pushing too hard against something that may or may not change. So
yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, I mean, my approach is always like 20%, right? Like when I have an idea of something that I think could be meaningful and impactful, when it's 20% formed, that's when I share it. And I'm like, hey y'all, I've got an idea. And usually at that point, it's literally just an idea. And I leave 80% so that everybody else can tell me, is that a good idea? Would you get involved? And like, what's missing and how do we build this thing together, right? So I always think of myself as like the instigator, and then like, there's no success without community, right? There's no success without folks being involved. And so my approach is literally, like, my students are always like, I'm sorry, what? Like, it has to be perfect and fully formed and totally functional before I put it out in the world. I'm like, oh, absolutely not. Like, it doesn't have to be even developed beyond, hey, I have this idea. I'm like, let everybody else make it better. Let everybody else turn it into the thing that it needs to be, because one person cannot, actualize on something like that. So I'm hearing the like small steps and all of the important moments, and also the need for community to, support each other to create the thing. That's great. Diane, did I see you were going to unmute?
I like how you use instigator, right? Everyone, when you think about craftivism, there isn't like a certain box. I do feel like a certain box for it. Like there are people who are instigators, like you said, who started out, and there are people who take it and run. Going back to the Pussy Hat movement, the two people who created it were the instigators, got it up and running. And there are some people who made the Pussy Hat and didn't do anything afterwards, get involved in politics or any activism. And there are a lot of other people who did. And I do think that that's great. And I think that there's just different, like I said, there's different forms of craftivism. And going back to my work, like in the crafting community, there are a lot of businesses, people who are designers, people who are dyers, people who sell project bags and pins, all these things for everyone to create other stuff with, whether it's other stuff for you as being a craftivist or just a knitter or crocheter. But the problem where like everyone on this panel, like, right? So for me, I look at my craftivism in the business equity, into the actual equity of businesses that are profiting from you buying that thread to stitch something, and that, or the yarn that you make. There is an systematic racism in every industry, right? And the crafting community is no different. And one of the ways that I have tried to solve or to bring awareness around this is to create these clubs. Some of them are, we have an IW Wells club that's coming out later this month. We have an RBG club. We have different clubs that, in the club, you have different BIPOC businesses that are making this stuff. And, we've been doing this since 2018. And what I keep saying is that the reason why I do this is because the equity in the crafting community is not equal. So I'm able to have the conversation with people to talk about how do we bring equity into the crafting community. And, last year, my company, we gave over $100,000 to BIPOC businesses through these clubs. And that is action. That money has gone back into their pockets, and and we're looking to double that. So a lot of people say, well, why are you doing all these clubs? Why are you doing all these clubs? I said, because the majority of this money is going back into the pockets of BIPOCs. And I'm trying to teach you guys and to educate you guys on the inequities that are in the crafting community when it comes to businesses making profit from all the work that you guys do. It is not equal. It's designers too. And so, every industry has its, kind of activism, but within the crafting community, the actual materials that we use to be craftivists or artists, it's not equal. The equity is not there. And that is where my craftivism is. I was one of the first, I was the only Black business at a trade show out of 300 in 2014 in the crafting community. You have got to be out of your mind to think that I was not going to raise this community and say, what is going on? This is a problem. And in 2015 and 2014, when I did that, did you know that a lot of people say, why would you speak up? That would hurt your business. That's where we were in 2014. And then when 2019, the crafting community had a discussion, that big breakout discussion on Instagram about racism and diversity, that's when people really started getting into it. But I just think that, we go back on the Pussy Hat movement, but there's so much more out there. And that's why craftivism has so many different forms, because depending on your area of interest or expertise, you're going to craft it in the way to move change. And that's what it's about. Craftivism really is about, moving and to have change. It's like taking action. That's the
Diane, that's yes. And what you're talking about, you've really articulated the impact that you're looking to have and the places that you're looking to have it. And I want to talk about impact and what y'all are like, what does that look like for you all? I did see one question come in from Steph that I want to answer because it is related to how I view impact. And for me, radical skill sharing is a huge component for my craftivism. And the idea of teaching others to embroider, to make, to be able to pick up a new skill set, pick up a new hobby if that's where they take it, and to be able to use that. And so, like, in deconstructing the capitalist, like, you have to pay to learn how to do things mindset. And for me, like, accessible radical Skillshare is a big part of the impact that I'm trying to have in through my craftivism work. So Diane's shared hers and I just shared mine, and so I'd love to hear from the rest of y'all.
So I love what you said, Diane. It made me really happy to hear about that, because my hobby is knitting. I'm not a genius knitter by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm good. But the idea that I can take that hobby and support Black-owned businesses that are providing the materials that I need for that hobby, bring that hobby, I'm not going to call it into totally the mode of craftivism, but it brings it into my activism, in that I'm putting my money into some place that supports my values. And I think that at the very basic level of craftivism, looking at where we're putting our money when we are purchasing the supplies that we're using is really important. Because if we're going to support someone, let's support someone who's aligned with our values or is in this community, rather than some mega industry that doesn't really give a damn. So I think that that's one way of just not, it's a way into an experience and a way into an understanding of the potential impact that we can have as we're doing our craftivism in other ways that are maybe more direct. But I don't want to leave out that sort of foundational piece of it. And then there was a question in the chat, and I just want to say that it was about sort of small steps. And I talk about small steps a lot because otherwise people stop. It's like small steps build on each other, and you develop your muscle for doing something and sustaining it. And I think that one thing that's super important in our craftivism and our activism in anything we care about is just sustainability and just having that continuity, and that there are all different kinds of activists and all different kinds of craftivists. They're the people who are out front, like Shannon, and then there are people way in the background you're never going to know, and they're all really necessary. One category is not more important than the other. So.
At my work, we kind of we like to leave all of the incomplete and broken like ideas out in the open, to let young people know that it's okay to fail, and that we all have failed, and that, like, I may have gone to school for this and I still make mistakes, or so we have a bunch of 3D printers, and we have a 3D printer graveyard. We're just like, this is a bunch of crap. And our, like our leadership kind of doesn't like that, but understands that, like young people have to be able to see that failure is okay, right? So, so for all those little steps, we also have little failures, but we also need to come back from them. And if we hurt people, then we need to apologize. Like, all of this stuff, like, is part of that. And we, for us, when we see like the most obstinate teens come in, and the most antisocial become social, all of a sudden we know we have impact. Our locations open up at 1 o'clock every day, and there's a line out the door before we even open. And so, like, we have young people who are cutting class, but they're coming to the library, so I can't hate on them for that, right? We have impact. We're doing something that is causing unreachable young people to be reachable, right? They all want to be reached. It's just, do they trust you, right? Like,
it's beautiful.
think echoing a bit of like institutional versus personal power, I think that there's like a level of a sense of responsibility that individuals have personally, like perhaps the individual craftivism. And then there's also a different level for like organizational. Like if you know, like personally as a maker, you know, I can do A, B, and C because that's what I believe in. I'm going to make quotes about Trayvon and kids that are getting killed because it's a Black 26-year-old female. You know, those are some things that disproportionately, you know, target my community. So I'm going to care ultra hard about them. But I think also for those who are in positions of power, I think, you know, your craftivism often needs to extend, you know, beyond just the art of creating and like bringing awareness personally, but also like, where are you in your job? What are you doing to open doors for others? I think it's almost interesting to see like the disconnect between some of like the most amazing, as you say, embroidery volunteers, and then their job that might have like never done anything for any marginalized group in like their entire existence. And so I think oftentimes it's the encouragement of like, you know, if you are, you know, committed to this work, and if you are a craftivist, artivist, you know, any form of art activist, I think your activism needs to often extend I mean, if it has the capacity to, you know, extend beyond, like bring it to other spaces. I don't think that craftivism or artivism or any form of like, you know, your beliefs and identities and ways that you express yourself need to be confined to the silo of just creating. Or like, for example, if you're like vice president of marketing at like a sewing shop, like, you know, what are you guys doing to diversify your feed, social media, you know, age, socioeconomic status, who are you marketing to, you know, what cultural sensitivity training have you given your staff, or what feedback are you getting, who are you inviting? I think oftentimes, you know, when we talk about the fluff of diversity and et cetera, it's always about like inviting people into our industry. And it's like, is that industry safe for Black and brown people at all times? You know, are we trying to just bring a few people of color and be like, okay, we've got some Black faces, we've got some brown faces, cool. It's like right now, there's a white majority culture in a lot of the crafting worlds and sewing industry and quilting world, particularly. Like there's an article that says like the average quilter is like 64 and owns 3 sewing machines with like an average income of $74,000. Like that's not what a lot of, you know, my peers that are sewing, you know, happen to look like. So when you think about like who the majority client is and how all things are catered to like that majority world, and even in your experience, Diane, with like one Black person in a vendor fair of 300, like that's the reality of oftentimes, you know, these crafts and art forms that are associated, you know, with a high level of luxury. But I think, you know, kind of focusing on your individual power, say something, do something, you know, silence is violence, and more than just, you know, personally, but I think, you know, positionality of like, you know, hold the companies you work for accountable. I know kind of pushing those barriers, you know, can transcend, you know, a form of, you know, more so solidarity than craftivism. But I think, you know, kind of thinking of both and not just thinking as one, you know, without the other.
Awesome. What do you think some of the easiest missteps that can be made that would dilute impact, or that have diluted impact? I love how every single one of you was like, oh shit, hold on.
I think going
the first one, I'm sorry, Eric, go ahead.
Are you sure? I don't. Well, thank you. I'm gonna forget it if I don't go. So so going back to what Sara was saying, like, are these places really safe for people of color, right? Like, so like, did your org, or are you doing the work, right, to make these places truly safe? Or are you just like, you know, pushing brown people up in front so people think you're cool, right? So like, I think that is a mistake. I think that's a mistake the library makes all the time, right? Is that like, we have really old traditions, right, about what classic books are, or whose work is valuable, and but beyond that, then we have to go and think about who can get a library degree, right? Who can get that education? Who can take on that debt to really make the place diverse, right? The librarian field is not very diverse, and part of it is because of the barriers of like economic barriers, but also the barriers of tradition, right? Like libraries have always been this way. They're always thought of as quiet. They're always thought of as very straight and white, you know? So like a lot of us in my department, we feel like this is our chance and our job to upturn all of that stuff and be loud and be messy and be brown and be queer, right? So.
Yeah, I agree completely with what Eric just said. And I think that when I reflect on that question, another misstep that I see people making is lack of clarity about what they're trying to actually accomplish. you know, or the scope of what they're trying to accomplish is really bigger than is possible to do. It's like, what's the next step? You know, you can have the goal, but you can't just get from here to there. You can't get from here to social justice just like that. So what's the specific intention of your project? What are you trying to get done?
I think that the biggest hurdle, and it's actually just, I mean, I've said this a lot, the work in craftivism, the work in activism, social justice is hard work, and you have to have your skin in the game. I worked at a nonprofit for 16 years doing social justice work, City Year, Big Sister, worked on a foundation level on, you know, initiatives to reduce youth violence, things like that. And the work that we do is hard work because it's been hundreds of years of systematic oppression. And I did a workshop for Knit Stars last 2 years or last year. And I said, you have 400 years of people that have been oppressed, and you have 400 years of people who have privilege. And somehow we are expected within the 21st century just to turn it around, and it's going to be done in 10 years. And it's not. So the work that we do is long, it is challenging, and you got to be committed. It's the commitment thing that I think that kind of holds people back. And I don't want to get off the subject, but someone had mentioned something about like Warm the Line, which was a really great initiative. I felt last year, particularly it was this year and like last year when they had to run off for the Georgia election, and it was winter, and people wanted to make sure that people were had like scarves and hats and to stay in line, you know, because it's real. Like if you are staying in line with the voter oppression and you want to vote and you didn't warm up, you know, and I think that's one of the things about like when we talk about like what are some of the barriers, or like what's holding, like with the Pussy Hat movement, it felt like people made the hat and left, and it's that commitment afterwards that didn't come after it. And there's organization that is doing like craftivism, which is Knit the Rainbow. We ended up raising $1,000. We did one of our clubs was the musical Rent. And we donated $5 from each of the clubs to Knit the Rainbow, which was to have warm clothing, hats, scarves, and whatnot for LGBTQI plus homeless youth in New York City, right, who didn't have these things. And for me, that organization in itself is craftivism. And the money that we raised as, you know, the brand with the club that we did, that is also craftivism. But like, it's the work, it's the commitment is what I think holds people back. It's a lot of work, and you got to be, and there's setbacks, and you got to be committed to keep pushing it forward.
It's real. Sara, did you want to add anything?
I mean, we're all kind of pushing forward the same common shared, you know, I think in terms of, you know, some tangible steps people could take. Now, Shannon, what would you pose if you had to say, I know specifically for quilt community, but if you had to say something for orgs in general, what are some tangible steps people could take individually and then institutionally, and obviously not like system institutionally, but like brands and businesses they might be creating?
Sara, I'm the one asking questions here tonight. That was not on the list of pre-approved question. I'm just kidding. You know, I think that there are, you know, I very much align with Omkari in the idea of like, just do something, right? Like, and I think that we get so overwhelmed, right? Or we do one thing and maybe we hear that wasn't the thing, right? Or like that didn't do it, or we see that thing that we did fail, right? And then we're like, well, it's just never going to happen, right? Like this is just, I'm not good at this. This is not my wheelhouse. Or we get called out, or we get called in. We're like, oh, I have to learn something here, right? And that, like that shutdown happens. And so, you know, I'm always just an advocate of like, just do something. And if you don't know what to do, there are other people doing a shit ton of work. Go find them and ask them, how can I get involved? How can I support the work that you're doing? I'm really interested in learning and growing, and I want you to know that I am in the beginning stage. Like, people come to me all the time and they're like, I don't even know what words to use, but like, I have to do better, and I want to do better, and I want to help, and I want to support. What do I do? And when they're so honest with me in that way, I can put them in the right places where they're not going to do harm, and that they will have the space to learn and grow, where it's not going to be, you know, put upon the group that they're trying to help or the issue that they're trying to help, you know, because that's harm creation, right? Like, it is not up to BIPOC people to teach white people how to do, right? And so I spend a lot of time in support of white folks, like, who need to do that learning, and sort of, you know, at the entry stages, so that the harm isn't being done, and folks, that labor doesn't go to BIPOC folks, basically. And so I think just being super self-aware and honest with yourself about where you're at, and you know, being honest with others about where you're at, so that we can connect you with the right places and the right resources, and the folks that can support that growth, if that makes sense. Sara, did I answer acceptably?
Yes, I'm not the moderator. I was just curious. No, I
Totally. You know I'm messing with you. You know,
yeah, no, I love it. I would definitely say we just made an anti-racist guidebook. You know, Jill, if you want to drop the link, I would so appreciate it. But we have like an anti-racist guidebook that's literally just learning, you know, made by a lot of makers, and it definitely has a maker focus, you know, on you know, just in general, like things you can do, next steps, definitely tangible steps. I think oftentimes, you know, and I say this, you know, personal experience, why people oftentimes want to do something, but they don't want to do harm. And I think what you just hit on, and it's like, I think sometimes, you know, like their intent might be amazing, but impact matters too. And it's like, you know, not every time we need to reinvent wheels, but really sometimes it's what can I do? How can I help? And I think sometimes just asking, like, this is a need I'm seeing, this is something I want to do, how can I do it? Because I really think keeping in mind, does the community want you to do it? Because I think sometimes people want to do stuff, and it often falls in that white savior trope of, you know, we can go down a lot of critical frameworks, but more importantly, you know, is that a need of the community? Like, you know, the things Eric are doing, community needs it. He's doing it in conjunction. He's obviously doing it under institution, but he's got a lot of young people who are coming into that space. So I think oftentimes in ideas that you create, in accountability that you create, in, you know, the work that you want to offer, does the community need that? And if not, you know, what issue do you want to fix? Who is it disproportionately harming? Why not, you know, make the plan in conjunction with that community? Whereas, you know, outside of the community, I'm just going to create something, you know, if you guys want it, cool. If not, I still want to do it. I think oftentimes that initial dialogue and conversation and building that bridge, you know, often volunteer with the community before you want to start creating something for the community. You know, I think like, while again, intentions could be amazing, I think, you know, activism really comes down to a form of solidarity. And really having those networks. I can't tell you how many people, you know, I want to bring, you know, people of color to my quilt shop. And it's like, how many friends do you have that are like, where's your network? You know, it's like sometimes people, you know, they just want to bring Black and brown to these white, predominantly like white supremacist spaces, and like the culture, like quilting, and I'd say quilting, not necessarily sewing in general, but quilting has a really strong subculture of white supremacists that often goes unaddressed. And even, you know, you can go on, you know, Instagram pages of some huge industries, and like there will be flat out racists all over their comments, like, this is inappropriate, hate doesn't belong here, leftist propaganda shouldn't be in sewing. And even the moderator of the business Instagram page isn't checking that. And I think often something as simple as checking it, like, hey, this is an industry that doesn't believe in that. This is like, I think if I could give any piece of encouragement to industry people, let your social media person be the most woke person there is, because silence often, you know, like misery loves company, and silence is saying a lot, because it's saying, I don't care to check it, I don't care to affirm it, but really, I'm not going to make the space. And forget safe space. Let's push brave space, because safe is obviously prioritizing someone's comfort. You know, so in brave space, like, what are we doing to make sure that this space is going to be, everyone's voice is going to be heard? And if someone says something racist, who cares if they're your customer? Like, we're all trying to dismantle capitalism at the end of things anyway. And like, you know, I think moving forward, you know, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
He has things to say.
So I just want to add something into what Sara was just talking about, because I think that part of what we get stuck in here is we do live in this culture that, you know, is always telling us it has to be the biggest, it has to be the best, you have to have the biggest following, you have to have the most impact. And our egos get totally caught up in this rather than just being in that place of, how can I be of service to this cause I say I'm dedicated to? And if we ask that question, how can I be of service? And then do whatever it is the people who you're asking the question of tell you to do, then you don't have to worry about any of that. It's like, okay, then you're good. And also just, you know, then if you make a mistake, it isn't about you being a bad human. It's about you being human. And we all make mistakes. And if you're coming from that place of service, it's a whole different dynamic. And you just don't get into that thing that gets us just going, sort of chasing our tails in search of something that's actually not our goal.
Yes, Omkari, yes. I did, folks know that I have prepared a final question, which is actually in service to the audience. And so the question is, what is one question, panelists, that you want to leave the audience with and the other panelists tonight to support us all in continuing our thoughtful analysis of craftivism? And I'm going to go first because I don't want anybody to take mine. So here, because I only have one, y'all. And so my question to the audience is, how uncomfortable are you willing to get? And how uncomfortable are you willing to make others in service to a just world? So food for thought. Diane, would you like to share yours?
Yes, first, Shannon, I want to thank you for having me on this panel. I've been on a panel with Sara before, and I just want to, I wish this pandemic were over with so that I can meet all of you guys and just talk even more about this. I'm so passionate about this work. One of the questions that I am starting to really ask people, particularly on Instagram and social media, is this thing of not support, but investment. Like, how are you willing to invest in BIPOC businesses to dismantle systematic racism? Like, how, like, are you like, it's not support. Support could be, and I say not support because support could be a 1 week, it could be a couple hours, but investment is a long-term thing. So I'm learning not to say support, but more invest. So are you willing to invest in, you know, breaking down systematic racism when it comes to equity? Are you willing to do it? And how will you do it?
While I have a silent moment, Shannon, I'm going to
do it.
My question would be, how are you critically intervening in a way that challenges and changes? You know, so I'd say personally, professionally, you know, those are kind of like how are you changing things personally, professionally, on a system level, in your job? You know, that would be my question.
Thanks, Sara.
I guess I can go next. I keep thinking about like how people are pushing us to, you know, like, or pushing the narrative, like, oh, I can't wait till things return back to normal. And so like, I want to like question normal, right? And say like, I wrote it down, so I'll read it. What has been exposed by the pandemic, and how can we resist returning to what was hurting us and others?
Yeah.
These are good.
And my question goes back to my big thing right now, which is I'm just so done with the idea of everything has to have a huge impact. So my question is, in a world that celebrates huge impact, what is a small goal that you can set yourself that will move your cause forward?
Fantastic. And for everybody who's listening, I'm going to do a write-up and a summary, and I will include these questions in there in case you didn't get them all down real quick. And we also did record this event. And so we'll put that link out so that you can share it with folks that you think might be interested. We will be hosting more of these in the near future. You know, I'll post them all over social media, so you'll be able to find them. But if you'd prefer like an email heads up, you can sign up on for my newsletter on my website at Badass Cross Stitch, and then you'll know about them as they come out. But wow, what a night. That was so much fun. It was everything I wanted and more. Thank you all for being here. I think this is just like the first of so many conversations that will be had, and that this will inspire for sure, right? Impact, hey. I want to thank the panelists for sharing your brilliance here tonight. It was really special and important. And thank you for sharing your time and your voices with us. Thank you to the Fuller Craft Museum for hosting us and supporting this work. And for everybody who showed up, thank you so much. And we didn't know there would be a chat, so there wasn't a lot of moderating that I could do while I was doing this. So we'll know that for the next time. So if y'all like really have a follow-up and want to engage, you know, in the write-up, all of everybody's contact socials and whatever, not social security numbers, but handles will be there for, I was like, their socials, you know, their addresses. No, I'm not giving that information away. And then lastly, if you feel so inspired and you have the means, a donation to the Fuller Craft Museum in support of the Craftivist in Residence program that is launching this fall would be wildly welcome and appreciated, so that we can create that space for a future Craftivist. And so, yeah, thank you all so much for being here. I hope everyone stays safe, gets immunized, wears a mask, and like, let's get through this together. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Shannon.
Thanks, Shannon.